in the in the context of the notion of collaboration and the notion of partnerships and the deeper dive that we'll take today, the land acknowledgement that I'll read in a moment takes on a super special meaning in terms of the context of how we can achieve true reconciliation. And so when we think about that spirit of reconciliation and reciprocity and truth, and we think about how we honor the ancestors and acknowledge the Treaty 7 territories, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, and which comprises the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. We also recognize that where we're privileged to work in collaboration with our Indigenous partners, that we're also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Canada, and Region 3. So as we go deeper into the conversation today, I would invite you to think about bringing this land acknowledgement with you through the processes and how you contribute and how you reflect on the importance of the collaboration opportunities and the reconciliation opportunities that the ESG conversation overall presents to us. It's unique in the world, and I think Canadians have a great opportunity to send very powerful signals to other oil and gas and energy jurisdictions around the world that also have opportunities to deal with their Indigenous communities. And so with that, we'll move right into the day. It will be a very exciting day. Here's the framework for the agenda. I'm going to pass it over to, we're privileged to partner with Brad Gollin on this, and Brad will lead us through a really interesting exercise around the real pragmatic dimensions and practical dimensions of ESG and how it's really real. And we have a great panel, and we're going to really focus on that really important space about how we think about ESG and the strategies behind it between members of the value chain, operators and drillers, and operators and service companies. And so that's the theme that we're trying to pull out today. We're going to have an active session on the small group discussions where your input will be really critical to not only informing your fellow participants in the workshop, but pushing this out into the broader ecosystem. I'll introduce the panel after that session, and between Brad and I, we'll moderate with our terrific panel, and then we'll have a Q&A that will come with the findings of the group discussions, and then right on noon, we'll promise to close it off on time. Dan and I will wrap up. And so without any further ado, I'd like to invite you to listen to Brad Gollin. He's a big thinker in this space. He's a big thinker in the collaboration space. And he traipses over a really broad landscape talking about the importance of these things. And it was a real pleasure to work with him on the planning of this workshop. And as we try and make sure that there's an ESG and C dimension to what we're all about. So Brad.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to participate and be a part of this. I think what you're doing and getting the word out on this is absolutely critical for our industry and for the sustainability and prosperity of Alberta and of the country. We play a big role in the economic landscape of our country, but our industry is really kind of been fighting an uphill battle. I'd say particularly the last 6 years. We have a real problem, and that problem is kind of the perception, how people see the energy sector, and we've been portrayed, or we've allowed ourselves to be portrayed as kind of a villain in this story. And it's really come home to roost in the last number of years, just because if you think about the popular opinion, it's really started to sway government policy. So we're seeing a lot of resistance. We're seeing everything from the protests on pipelines to the slowdown and if not full stop of a lot of the regulatory approval process, to money. Ultimately, our industry lives and dies on capital. It's a capital intensive industry. And that flow of capital has been cut off. And we can talk about all sorts of reasons as to why, But at the end of the day, we're working in an adverse situation. And I think what we want to do is really look at this and kind of say, in these challenging times, it's really a Darwinian moment for our industry. And Darwin didn't say survival of the fittest. What Darwin actually said was it's not the strongest, it's not the most intelligent, it is the most adaptable to change that survives. And I think from that perspective, I think ESG gives us one of the best opportunities for us to be able to take advantage of this kind of global wave around ESG. And really, if we do adapt to it, if we do embrace it, if we look at it as an opportunity, then I think we can not just thrive, but we can not just survive, but we'll thrive. So I like to kind of look at this from a really 100,000-foot high-level perspective. And I think ESG is something that's popular in the media, COP26. I mean, it's become a hot word and a hot button. But I think looking at it from a perspective, this is not a fad. This is something that's really here to stay. Because, I look at this in a sense, traditional business, that's always been there. A lot of us kind of still operate from that traditional mentality. In the last 20 years in particular, we've seen a huge shift, the data, the information economy, technology. And you look at everything from our rigs and our rigs are operated with joysticks now in control rooms, to the data rooms that we have, the access to data, the technology has really transformed our industry and all industries. And it's going to continue to do that. But I think the tectonic shift that we're really seeing right now is around sustainability. And if you're a skeptic on whether sustainability is real and here to stay, ultimately, if you don't believe me, believe the money. Because the money has said that if we're going to feed you, the world of private equity has basically made ESG and the sustainability mandate their number one non-financial criteria. So this is real. The money says it's real. So I think that's really kind of forced us all to wake up and pay attention. So I think there's a lot of confusion when people throw around the ESG, environmental, social, and governance, as to what exactly this means. So I've got a video I'm gonna play, and this is probably the best soundbite to explain exactly what ESG is.
Environmental, social, and governance criteria, or ESG, are a set of standards used by socially conscious investors to screen potential companies to invest in. Environmental criteria consider a company's actions as a steward of nature. How does a business manage its GHG emissions? What are its actions on energy saving, reduction of pollution, natural resource use, deforestation, ethical treatment of animals, etc. Climate change poses many environmental risks for businesses. Managing these risks protects the company's investments and its finances. Social criteria look at the company's impact on society. Do the company's working conditions show regard for the health and safety of its employees, diversity and protection of human rights? Do the company's suppliers have the same values? Are stakeholder interests considered? The S of ESG increases productivity, morale, and brand loyalty. Governance factors look at corporate policies and how a company is run. They focus on establishing a business that is transparent, fair, responsible, and compliant with the law. Good governance avoids unpleasant financial surprises and ensures alignment between share owners and the management interests. A modern world needs modern solutions. ESG weeds out unsustainable, risky companies and encourages investors to put their money in more responsible companies.
So that's probably the best summary. And I think what's really important to note there is that ESG is an investor's financial criteria. It's a way for them to benchmark and evaluate who to invest money in. So ESG did not kind of suddenly appear. Sustainability and the whole sustainability movement has been around for decades. It kind of leads back to the 70s and the UN's initiative around sustainability and their 16 sustainability criteria. But in the last 10 years, what's happened is the investment community has woken up and realized that companies that are taking on this greater sustainability responsibility, and they kind of categorize it around environmental responsibility, social responsibility, and ethical responsibility. Companies that were actually living and doing that were actually outperforming. So, it's not like money just woke up suddenly yesterday and took on a conscience. It didn't. The money still is about making more money. But what they realized, and one of the more referenced, we don't have a lot of data yet in terms of the financial and performance impact of ESG specifically, but we do have a lot of research around this area of conscious capitalism, companies that take on these kind of social and community and ethical responsibilities much more seriously, organizations that really look for multi-stakeholder wins. So there's an area of thinking and a lot of research around this. So in this slides, we share these decks. These links are active. So there's Harvard reviews and reports, and almost every business school has got reviews on these. And what they found is that companies that live these higher values, that do long-term planning, that take their stakeholder responsibilities equal with all of their stakeholders, not just with their shareholders, are actually outperforming. As a matter of fact, the research shows that these kind of companies are outperforming significantly. And I think one of the role models for this long-term value creation strategy is Warren Buffett. And the rest of the investment community has looked at him and said, okay, I think he might be onto something. So what they did is they wanted to kind of come up with a criteria. How do we identify which of these companies are operating in this kind of sustainable, more conscious manner? And that's how they came about with that ESG function. So in terms of, Simon Sinek says, always start with why. If we don't understand why, we don't care what or how. So what I really want to emphasize here is why ESG is something good for us to consider and embrace, because, first off is the money. We are a capital intensive industry, and the investment community, $40 trillion around the world now, defines itself, and private equity defines itself as ESG. And this has really become an absolute criteria. It is going to be the only way we are going to get the taps back open in terms of capital investment in industry, and all industries. So it does create greater value. But remember, ESG is a measure of sustainable performance. It is the tail, it is not the dog. And if we're really going to be effective at this, then we really need to kind of embrace it and make it kind of integral to the DNA of our organizations. Because if we don't, the SEC actually issued their first ever general circular warning against ESG reporting and its reliability. And BlackRock got kind of singled out in terms of questioning reporting in their investment and the companies, how they evaluated. And subsequent to that, BlackRock turned around and put two environmentalists to try and fix up their image. They put two environmentalists on the board of Exxon. So this having to prove out your ESG performance is absolutely critical. so just doing it as a paper exercise, ticking boxes for investors as investors relations is not going to be good enough. We're actually going to have to live this. And if we do, there's a great opportunity for us. Ms. Vanderhoven, she was a former International Energy Commission director. She did a keynote here in Calgary 2 years ago that Haskane brought in. And her point was the world needs more Canada. She said she knows Canadian operations. She was familiar with them. And the irony is we actually already operate to the highest standards in the world. We operate with the most integrity. We operate to the highest environmental and employment and labor standards. I worked in many different countries, and I know we have everything to be proud of. Her point was the world doesn't know about this. The world does not have an accurate perception on who we are and how we operate. So we have a huge opportunity. She said we need to show the world, Canada's figure out how to walk the talk around this ESG. So we have to become much better at communicating and showing ourselves as role models. And that's going to be a big part. With that, we can get that support in terms of the investment community. But it's not just investors. One of the things we're seeing now is we're seeing every one of the majors. So everyone in the industry is starting to produce these ESG reports. But we're a food chain. There's a whole network out there it takes to operate in this industry. So what is going to be coming down the pipes, and we know it, is ESG and ESG reporting and ESG behaviors are going to be expected from suppliers. So operators are going to be demanding that their suppliers step up and meet these standards. And in a lot of cases, we're doing the right things already, but we're going to have to be able to tell the stories and communicate it. And that's part of the reporting. And so there's a real need around this ESG. Clients are going to be expecting it, and it's going to create reasons to switch. If you don't have it, you probably aren't going to be able to get on a lot of master service agreements. And companies that are living this and actually truly starting to believe it, it's going to create a loyalty because, we want to work with people who share our values and are like-minded. And there is, additional costs in terms of equipment, making equipment that really can deliver improved environmental performance, improved safety factor, which is a huge, example of social responsibility, et cetera, can cost more money, but we need to be able to come to a relationship, and a symbiotic relationship between suppliers and operators, where that premium equipment that delivers this ESG performance is financed and paid for. So we'll have to come up with that pricing model around that. The next area that embracing ESG is going to be really critical is in the aspect of attracting talent. ESG and sustainability is a huge criteria and a value base for this next generation of talent that we're hiring. So, in terms of people under 40, it's the biggest generation in history. It's the most educated generation in history. It'll make up 75% of the workforce by 2025, and this is their core values. A classic example of this is the fact that my daughter's in engineering at the University of Calgary. They no longer have a petroleum engineering program at the University of Calgary because there was no interest in the program, because young people did not see it as aligning with their values. Millennials and younger workers will actually take less pay and change their jobs to work for companies that they respect and aligns with their values. So if we want to attract the best talent, we really have to, this is an opportunity, if we embrace this, for us to change their perception of us and us to be able to attract that talent. So it's critical in that respect. And then societally, if we're going to get a social license to grow, if we're going to be able to get these permits and be able to get, the general public supporting us, if they knew to what standard we operate, and if they knew our role and our opportunity to be a role model and show the world how to do conventional energy, because the energy needs of the future are going to be complex and sophisticated, and it's not going to be a sudden transition. So we can show that there is a sustainable and prosperous way to transition. And, that's what I think we need to step up and be a role model for society. And it's going to be with all of our stakeholders telling our story on how good we operate that will be able to influence and change that perception. It's not us telling our own story. It's when all of the stakeholders that we work with tell the story that it changes. So again, as I said, this aspect of sustainable businesses that have that long view, operate to higher standards, it's not some concept for little small companies that are here to green the planet. The history is companies like Costco and IKEA and Honda and Toyota and Patagonia and Southwest Airlines. These companies, Zappos Shoes, Tom's, these companies operate to these standards, and these companies have all earned significantly higher returns than their competitors over time. They created much more value over time, so that these are examples, great examples of how you can operate, be sustainable and highly prosperous. So this is not a myth. There's companies out there living, and there's companies that we can take a ton of lessons and learn from and apply within our industry and benefit in the same way. So again, I want to emphasize that ESG is about sustainable performance. It's a measurement. It is the tail. It is not the dog. And what we really need to do is create ESG conscious businesses. And when I say conscious, I mean really that mindfulness, that awareness that ESG has got to be kind of core to how we operate and how we make our decisions. And living these sustainable values is how we're going to outperform. It's how we're going to really transform and transition our industry to thrive in the future. And it comes out of this UN, like all of the sustainability stuff does. This is kind of the foundation. And in our industry, we're going to have to embrace it and make our own kind of flavor of this that really allows us to operate. So it's interesting because I ran a session last week. And in the session I ran last week, as I was presenting this, I had someone step up and they said, I got to be honest, I just spent 2 months producing an ESG report and I think it's all crap. He said, I hired a consultant and we went through all of this work. It was a huge effort. And he said, I don't see what the value of all of the, that effort that we put in. And when he said that, I kind of showed him this slide and I said, I agree with you. If we're only doing this as PR, then we're not really going to see the benefits of it. If we're only doing this to tick boxes and we're not truly kind of embracing the philosophy and the concept, then we are not going to win in this game. As a matter of fact, my point to him was, if you only do this as window dressing, then at some point you're going to get caught out. And if you don't believe me and you want this to be relevant to you personally, ask yourself, how much of your personal net worth is in your energy stocks? How much of your personal net worth is in your stocks in your own company? And, he said he had a good shareholding in corporate stocks. And I said, so what happens if you get caught out like Volkswagen got caught out for ethical misconduct, for societal misconduct, for environmental misconduct? They lost 60% of their market cap. So if you're only doing this as lip service, what happens if when you get caught out that it's not real, as the SEC has expressed concerns with, and the market cap for your company drops by 60%. I mean, Patagonia is kind of talks always about their sustainability and their social responsibility, et cetera. They got caught out not having a close eye on their supply chain. They lost 40% of their market cap. So if all we're doing is using this as PR, it is a very risky game to play because there are no secrets. You know, this is the internet world where everyone's got a camera and everyone's out looking at, you know, how we work on a well site, how we're working at a plant site, how we're interacting in our local communities, how we're receiving environmentalists when they show up on our doorsteps. So if we're not really starting to recognize that we have to kind of understand what this ESG stuff is about and really kind of integrate this into how we run our companies. If we do, the companies that do this will really benefit. They will see that long-term growth in value because it will inspire and engage their talent in a different way. As a matter of fact, in the workshop a couple of weeks ago I did with an association group, one of the CEOs for one of the companies actually stepped up and commented that they started off doing this as a reporting mechanism. But his comment was, as they got into it and as they started to present it out and take it out into their organization and have discussions on it, he said it started to transform how people thought about things. It got people excited. It got them interested. So he went from being a bit of a skeptic to actually going, you know, we were doing this and I was doubtful, but now he's a full-on fan because he's seen a real cultural shift in his organization and an excitement and an energy for people to embrace this and to make this happen. And he's seeing changes in behaviors and he's seeing people get more involved and more engaged. And he's become a believer. So I think, you know, whether you're a believer, whether you're skeptical, you know, the evidence shows, history and the research shows that living this ESG stuff really does pay off. And we have to live it if we're going to be successful. A lot of the material around ESG and a lot of the focus you'll find, at least my observation is I've seen so much of it talk about the reporting and the mechanics of it, that type of thing. But that CEO who brought into his company, what he saw was a cultural transformation. And there's a book called Conscious Capitalism by Raj Sisodia and John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods. And all of those companies that I had listed on that previous slides were companies they studied around this conscious capitalism sustainability values set. And what I liked about this book and this methodology was what they kind of distilled down was, how do you bring this into the culture of your organization? So their model is really around purpose, having a higher purpose, stakeholders, leadership, and culture, and really transforming the DNA of the business to embrace this and how to do that. So that's why I kind of really kind of embraced this, because lots of stuff out there telling us what we need to do. There's not a lot of material around ESG specifically telling us how to do it. So this is one of the tools that I know I use in my work to help drive this. So, you know, when we talk about purpose, a lot of us in our organizations, a lot of us have purpose statements or missions and stuff, and it talks about, you know, to be the most profitable, to be the most successful, et cetera, et cetera. But if we truly want to inspire people and we want to change the perception of our industry, if we actually back that up and think about what is the effect of what we do as an industry or as a company, you know, supply companies, what do? Well, we enable operators to be able to provide the world with energy. Well, what good does providing the world with energy do? Well, that's really what creates a prosperous, thriving society. You know, so if you think that your purpose, as opposed to just making money and being profitable, if your purpose is to really create a thriving, sustainable world for everyone, that's something that kind of changes the image and perception of why we do what we're doing. So I think there's an opportunity here, if we look at that, to elevate how we present ourselves to the world And that can really kind of change that perception and also inspire people. So again, as we kind of get into this, on the environmental side, I think there's a lot of things that we can do, but I think when I look at environmental, it's almost become a baseline. The world is expecting businesses across the board to do everything they can. So environmental is almost table stakes. We all have to do this. We've all got a responsibility around CO2, greenhouse gases, et cetera, et cetera. And this really just kind of presents some of the examples of things that we can do. I think culturally, I think really at the end of the day, where the rubber hits the road with respect and where there's a real opportunity for us to change perception of our industry and to kind of make ESG core to our businesses, is how we interact at every level in our organizations with every one of our stakeholders. Because at the heart of this social responsibility aspect is this commitment, this desire to look for win-win-win solutions with all of our stakeholders. And I think as Canadians, this should be an easier one for us, because to me, one of the things I love about our culture is we tend to believe much more so in the win-win approach to doing business, to working with each other. To me, we're a much more collaborative society. You know, I look at other places in the world and, you know, that winner take all, that's all about winning. Well, we want to win, but we want others to win too. And when we look at this, every interaction from the field, from the well site, from the hockey arena in the small town to the boardroom, if my C-suite is talking with a First Nation, or talking with our employees or our customers or our suppliers, our investors, the public, and the public is really kind of our communities, but also the government, First Nations, our interactions with people who have a vested interest in the environment. Every one of those interactions, we need to be thinking that ESG conscious aspect, is this a win for both of us? And if I keep at the negotiating table, can we figure out a way to find a win for both of us or for all of us? Because these are complex systems, and coming up with a win-win takes more effort, but it's a sustainable solution when you come up with it. It's the one that will create more value in the long run. And when we talk about governance, again, to me, ESG has to be believed and embraced from the top to the bottom and from the bottom back up to the top. And so one of the things for me, the thought of governance, it always sounds like something conceptual, something the board worries about, and, you know, us people out in the field don't have to think about. But I kind of want you to think of governance differently. If you reframe governance and think of it as trustworthiness. And trustworthiness is the alignment between our words and our action. And ultimately, the truth is always in our actions. So if we think of trustworthiness, and then if we're doing that, every one of us can have a role and contribute towards good governance within our businesses. So governance doesn't just live at the C-suite, it lives throughout our organizations. And are we trustworthy? So I think that's one way to embrace it. So, I mean, I've talked quite theoretically, but I want to bring this down to something that's kind of near and dear to me around this, because, you know, as I've worked both sides. I've worked as an engineer and in technical roles in the operator side. So I worked as a drilling engineer, production engineer, reservoir engineer, project engineer, pipelines. And having lived on that side of the desk, and then having gone on to manage service companies and grow some of my own companies, we have a real problem in our industry. And the problem we have is we, for decades and decades, have operated almost like adversaries between operators and suppliers. You know, it's strange because even a year ago, somebody I know in supply chain, and they They work in one of the top 5 producers in the industry. And the director in their company, came back and said, our role is to make sure our suppliers are stealing as little as possible from us. And it shocked me that somebody would say that out loud, but it disappointed me, because I keep thinking we got to get past this. It's like all of us sitting in one boat and kind of trying to throw each other out of the one boat or sink the boat. Nobody benefits from that. And this adversarial relationship between suppliers and operators has really got to change. If you look at companies like Toyota, Toyota is a great example, because you look at one of their competitors, Chrysler historically always had a reputation for grinding their suppliers, making them bid and then rebid. And then once they award a bid, then they say, we still need 10% off, and it's going to be half the volume. And then they get poor quality and they get all sorts of supply chain problems. And then they wonder why they're not financially performing and they need bailouts. I've seen that, and I've done that. I've had to bid and rebid, and basically been ground down to where companies are telling me they need another 10%, and I tell them, I'm working break even. I will open up and show you all my books. I'm not making any money, and I'm certainly not recapitalizing my equipment and my capital assets. And you want more money off me? I mean, this is an unsustainable way to interact and operate, and dysfunctional. And we really need to evolve, and nobody in sophisticated, successful industries operate this way. We are in this together. There is one ecosystem, and we are all part of making this work. Toyota, when they interact with their suppliers, they sit down and they lay out their 5-year plan, forward-looking, and they lay out their targets and their numbers, and they are very transparent with their suppliers, because they challenge their suppliers and embrace their suppliers and say, you're the key to our success. How do we get our costs down? How do we get better parts? How do we make these more reliable? How do we get our supply chain more efficient? And, it's really a partnership arrangement. And it really has enabled them to drive down both their capital expenditures, their operating expenditures. It's allowed them to be the most profitable, automobile maker in the world. And they developed this whole aspect of Kaizen and Lean. And Lean is really about, how do we take this continuous improvement philosophy and take it from the top to the bottom, and from the bottom back up to the top of the company, which is a great example for us to be able to look at when it comes to how do we take ESG and take it from the top to the bottom and back up again, so that really becomes a part of our DNA. So with their approach in looking at this, it is purely collaborative. They look at it as all stakeholders have to win. And in the long term, they know that's what makes them the most successful. So I think there's a great role model here for us in terms of, we need to kind of reset how we interact and how we treat each other. And I want to give you one more example, because, a friend of mine was involved in a large oil company and wanted to change the dialogue with suppliers, and got a lot of pushback, from them. There are suppliers, tell them what to do. And so he was struggling to get support. He had support at the top in terms of, the executive kind of looked at this and, yeah, there's co-destiny. We need to work with our suppliers. There's support at the bottom. People at the field level who work and face suppliers day to day realize the value they bring and how critical they are. But there's a lot of resistance in the middle. And what eventually he did is, he went to it and said, well, let's look at this. We're doing well pairs for $12 million. Other people in the industry are doing well pairs for $6 million. How come? Why is that? And so what he did is he said, let's go to the suppliers and let's ask. And we as suppliers, I know, in my last role in service rigs as BD director, we knew more about our clients' wells than they knew, because we did work for all of them. And we did work for the people who did it for 6 million for a well pair. And we did work for the people who did it for 12 million well pair. But you know what? They never came and asked us how to do it better. They just told us to shut up and do what we were told. And here's the well program and deliver on it. And there was a real missed opportunity. So he actually took and he engaged with suppliers and he kind of parked the assumptions and the attitude and everything else and said, how can you guys help us to get our costs down? What are the things we can change in our program? So let's start with a blank sheet and let's talk about how our program works, that type of thing. And they did a couple of wells and they actually got costs down significantly. They didn't get it down to the 6 million, but they knocked several $1 million just in collaborating in a different way. So there's tons of opportunity if we work collaboratively in this to really improve our operations and our businesses. So I'm gonna kind of park it there. That was really the overview I want to do in ESG. And what I want to do now is there's a ton of knowledge and experience within the participants in this group. And everyone has kind of seen different aspects of the industry where they're seeing ESG. So what I want us to do is pool all of our kind of experiences and perspectives on this. And I want this to become a resource for everyone. So what we're going to do is we're going to break out into small groups and we're going to have some discussions for about the next 15 minutes. And there will be somebody in the group to be a facilitator. So they're just going to make sure that everyone participates. And I'd like to get somebody to
Brad, you got muted.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to break out into small groups. You'll get an invitation to go into the group. One person will operate as a facilitator. And I'd like, the one person facilitating each group to basically ensure that everyone participates. And the way we're going to do that is I'm going to ask to have no discussion for the first 2 minutes so that everyone has a chance to kind of organize their thoughts. And I want you to kind of write down your thoughts around these 2 questions and I'll put them in the chat. How do you see ESG impacting your business today? And what have you learned about ESG so far in your own experience? So I'd like everyone to kind of write down their thoughts around those 2 questions. And then in the groups, I'm going to ask everyone to basically take turns, share, and then facilitator, I'd like you'll probably see some patterns and some insights. And I'd like somebody to write down in the chat and capture in the discussion with what you heard, what were kind of the 3 biggest ideas or the 3 themes that you came up with? And I'd like you to write those in the chat. So we're going to break out into those groups. Everyone write down your thoughts. We'll have a facilitator in each group. And let's hear from each other now.
And now recording as well. Okay. Peter, you're muted. Did you have something more you wanted to add?
Oh, I was just going to, I guess, make sure and be clear in my mind as to the main points that we wanted to bring forward for the group.
Sure.
And so the question, if it's a really, I mean, I don't want to take up too much time, but if the question is how has ESG affected your business, and what was the second again?
What have you learned in your ESG efforts so far?
ESG efforts, yeah. So I guess my response to that is I feel it's something that should be integral and as I've written, an integral component of a program or an activity, and that it needs to be more than anything else meaningful and applicable and practical.
Mhm.
The intent, and that's really, I'm not sure that there's that for me that's the most important thing, is that it really has to come from a place of much like what Brad spoke to so well. But it has to come from a place of genuine interest and intent.
Right. Oh, it looks like everyone's coming back to the room now. Thanks, Peter.
We just got cut off of our breakout room, so we're back. But it morphed into a major bitch session. Brad, you're muted.
I've got a couple of slides too. I think we have to sometimes vent. That's healthy, but we got to get past the venting and you know, that's focusing on the solution. And I'll set up to go to the next phase. So everyone's back now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the feedback off from the groups, and hopefully some of you captured in the chat. We'll re-engage with some of that when we kind of have the open discussion Q&A from our speakers. So I want to move us forward, and I just want to kind of frame the rest of it from a couple of perspectives. Seth Godin talks about change is not a threat, it's an opportunity. And survival is not the goal, transformative success is. And I think that's the way, if we're going to be successful and we're going to use ESG to kind of take ourselves into a better future, that's the mindset we need. You know, skate to where the puck is going, and ESG is where the puck is rocketing to. So I think that's where we need to go. And this is probably one of the most powerful tools I use in cultural transformation, because what we want to do, what we want to have the discussion is, we need an above the line discussion. We spent way too much time as an industry having the below the line discussion, blaming others, having our bitch fests, and honestly, us bitching and trying to get into these who's right and who's wrong debates and arguing we've got the facts. We're not winning any friends. We're not making any people sympathetic to our cause. And honestly, as Bill Maher says, we've kind of portrayed ourselves as whiny little bitches when we tell everyone else they're wrong. We need to stop having this below the line, who's right, who's wrong, and we need to get above the line and focus on the solution. If we position ourselves as the solution and wanting to be at all tables as part of the solution, then people will want to hear what we have to say. So I'm going to take it off at that. And Dan, Bill, if you guys want to take us on to next phase.
All right, well, thank you very much, Brad. And I hope everybody enjoyed Brad's overarching presentation, which laid out a great groundwork for our phenomenal panel. And really the filling in the sandwich was also the great discussion that we had in our room, and I'm sure that you had yours. So coming back to this idea, and as Brad pointed out, about the sort of rethinking or the reimagining, you know, I've been in the industry a couple of decades now, and it was often described for me that the relationship between an operator and a contractor was often either a master-slave relationship or a feudal lord, feudal serf relationship. And that it was often, to Brad's point earlier, based on varying levels of acrimony and adversarialness. And really, the ESG dynamic gives us an opportunity to rethink that. And so when we think about how an operator and the value chain can collaborate by foregrounding ESG thinking on performance, and whether it's a governance dynamic, a safety dynamic, an environmental performance dynamic, there's real opportunity in actually thinking about, to Brad's point, what a master contract looks like that sits on a foundation of ESG strategic thinking. And so we've got a phenomenal panel here. that will help us explore that. And so, what I would say, even though we don't have a member of our Indigenous partnership community on the panel right now, Jennifer Ezekiel, who is the Vice President of ESG and Strategy at CDN Controls, will cover that off. She has been a phenomenal addition to that team. It's a growing company, and she oversaw their first ESG report production. A phenomenal read, and I would commend it to you. Bob Geddes is a giant in our industry. He, as President and Chief Operating Officer of Ensign Energy Services, he looks after a really complementary broad range of services that are all connected to the value chain. And he's doing a lot of thinking about the importance of ESG strategic drivers in his business. And then, of course, my fellow board member, Donna Phillips, who is the EVP of Corporate Development at Pacific Canbriam Energy, has been doing some phenomenal work, not only in the Indigenous opportunity space, but her company is one of 3 in Canada now to be certified by the EO 100, the Equitable Origin 100 certification on natural gas production process, which was a major opportunity move that speaks volumes to the ESG philosophy that prevails at this company. So what we're going to do, we're going to invite each of our panel participants to reflect for a few minutes individually on their thoughts about the collaboration dynamic, the importance of collaboration, how collaboration can de-risk a business relationship in an ESG context. And then we'll open the floor to your questions, and Brad and I will moderate that back and forth. So without any further ado, we'll go in this order. We'll start with Jennifer, move to Bob, and then conclude with Donna.
Great, thanks, Bill. Thanks for that introduction. Really appreciate it. So I'm Jennifer Ezekiel, VP of ESG and Strategy at CDN Controls. I am an engineer by training, and I've been working on the environmental side of the energy sector for my whole career, in consulting for producers, and then now on the services side. So it's been interesting. I think I had the privilege of kind of being involved in sort of sustainability back when it was really more of a grassroots approach, and let's get composting into offices and the cycle to work programs and that type of thing, and helping clients with that, and now obviously becoming much more sophisticated in how we're all talking about it today. So it's been great to be part of that evolution, and I think that being kind of really integrated into ESG on the supplier side has been very interesting and challenging, but I think quite fascinating. I think a couple of things that I really appreciated, Brad. You did a really wonderful overview and introduction there, and made some scribbling down a bunch of notes and kind of key things you've done there. But I think that piece about what you mentioned about governance being equivalent to transparency, and then transparency is essentially trust. And I think trust is maybe that's the word you use to sort of frame what is ESG, because I think when you had a lot of good examples there of companies with great ESG performance, and they're outperforming their peers, and I think there's an element of trust, right, that you're doing what you say you do, and you're operating your business from a trustworthy perspective, right? And whether that is that you're how you interact with the environment, how you interact with Indigenous communities, that the trust is kind of the key theme across that. So I really appreciated that comment. A couple of things I wanted to kind of point out is I think there's, when this the theme of this webinar kind of first came out, I love it, the C for collaboration. I had to chuckle as well, because there was a great article that was released in August 2020 by the Harvard Law School Forum on Corporate Governance, and they called it the other S in ESG, which is building a sustainable and resilient supply chain. So S for supply chain, and certainly take a read of that article, but I think a lot of the same themes that we're talking about today. And I think the piece in there is, I think that really, regardless of people's background or level of exposure to ESG or belief in ESG, like I think the piece that probably everyone can relate to is kind of that risk mitigation piece. So I think we're all familiar with that. That triangle, the cost, schedule, quality triangle, for any project or project management or whatnot. And I think, the middle of that triangle is risk, right? And it's how do you manage the risk of, your cost, your quality, your schedule. And I think, what we're seeing is that ESG is really a risk mitigation. And, it's been interesting because I think, you know, with my role with CDN and, you know, being on the supplier side, we sort of think about, okay, how can we be part of kind of that risk mitigation for our customers and our clients? You know, really approaching it from the partnership perspective and not the adversary. You know, I can certainly relate to those comments that Brad and Bill made, and you know, it's in everyone's best interest that we can be partners and not just be kind of a commodity for our customers. I think, you know, one of the key questions that I've asked, I think, in every meeting I have with our customers, probably almost you know, to a fault now, but I keep asking it, is, you know, how are ESG priorities being incorporated into your procurement decisions? Right? How are they being incorporated? And I think that the common theme I see here, and you know, certainly not the companies represented on the panel because they're doing phenomenal work, but I would say as a general comment, you know, we see these companies where at the C-suite executive level, you know, they're talking about ESG, it's so important, it's a priority, and you know, doing all this great work. And then you get down to the procurement level, and the only thing that matters is money, right? Is the dollar value. So if this is really a priority, it needs to reflect in those decisions. And so I think, you know, continuing to kind of encourage, you know, some customers that are maybe a little bit less mature in the space to think about, you know, first of all, is how do you even include ESG criteria? Second of all, you need to be ranking that, right? If it's truly a priority, it needs to be reflected in ranking. And then verification, right? So making sure that people are doing what they said they would, or, you know, they're not just putting nice shiny numbers in their bid that aren't real. So those are some pieces. And I think the last thing I'll touch on here is just, you know, the verification. I think in the breakout room, we talked a lot about the challenge with inconsistency in reporting and data and frameworks and all those challenges that we're all familiar with. But I think that sort of ability to have third-party verification for suppliers is going to be great for suppliers and also for producers. So Equitable Origin 100 is you know, is an amazing example, and I'm sure Don will speak more to that, but you know, Pacific Cambrian and Vermilion, ARC7G being certified there. CDN is currently going through the process as well as a supplier, and I think that's a piece where, regardless of how mature your supply chain is and they're familiar with ESG, if they have a supplier that sort of has that EO 100 certification, or perhaps it's a Canadian Council of Aboriginal Business certification, it's sort of a very easy way for them to have that trust and sort of, give sort of credit that this is legitimate, what people are saying. So I look forward to hearing what the rest. I think the key here is kind of that trust piece, and you know, really partnerships, not adversaries or not commodities, and that's certainly a piece that's been exciting for me to work on with our customers.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jennifer. And now we'll move to Bob. And I know, Bob, at Ensign, you're leading a conversation on ESG thinking and strategy. And so building off what Jennifer has said, we're interested in you take us on that inside baseball view of things.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the reflection is very similar. I'm also chairman of the IEDC, which is the worldwide onshore and offshore drillers. So we get to touch a lot of different things around the world. One thing that I think we're all agreeing on is we need to start measuring this. What gets measured gets managed. And this will start to define the success in ESG. To that point, we're already finding, like we found in safety, there's a few companies that have become a verification tool for safety protocol. They come in and audit. Everyone reports into it. There's a couple of groups in the US already starting, one in Colorado and one out of the Houston area that some of you may be familiar with. I'm not sure if they've reached across the border here in Canada yet, but they will be, because I think this is the obvious situation is there has to be a standard of emission reporting established. I know the API in the US is on top of this, and at the IEDC, we also have a subcommittee working with operators to present this. Again, capitalism is alive and well. As I mentioned, there are a couple of companies in the US already looking to be the go-to verifier for emissions in the oil and gas space. So that will evolve, and I think it's evolving very quickly. I'd be curious if anyone on the call here has been contacted by any of these people in Canada. It surprised me if they haven't. But that's going to be the key to the next step. It's going to be the pragmatic next step. The other thing we talked about in our breakout was about telling the world. And Brad, you mentioned that there was a discussion where a speaker had mentioned that Canada is one of the best oil and gas deliverers on an emissions basis. Yet no one would ever think that of Canada. We talked about in the US, you hear the American Gas Association being very vocal on ads of what good work they're doing to help protect and provide a standard of living and quality of life to Americans. Where is that in Canada? We all shook our heads and we said, we haven't seen it. So maybe there's a bigger question there. Does anyone in Ottawa care? To be the cynic for a moment. But I think we have to get beyond all of that and say, let's do the right thing. Now, one of the chats saw the question, okay, who's going to pay for all this? We're drilling wells in basically half the time we did 5 years ago. So our emissions is half of what it was. We find, 80% of our rigs that we run around the world are running on electricity. We're also starting a program. With a major in the US, we're going to drill a zero emissions well, where we're going to take green hydrogen and hydrogen fuel cell and run our rig and drill a hole in the ground. So it'll be a zero emission well. It'll get a lot of headlines. It's technically possible. There's no technical issues there. The cost of the well will probably go up by about 10%. So the question is, what's the cost of emissions? Is it 10%? Now you start to quantify some things, and I think there's a lot of people are poking at this a little bit, but the easy putt, I think, is natural gas. Why we aren't using more natural gas to run rigs? I think it comes back to people go, I've got 3 wells to drill in an area. I'll pick the lowest provider of services. We'll go drill the well and away we go. We've got to start with measuring it, and what gets measured gets managed. And we have seen one bid in the US with a major already start to put an emissions figure in there. And so they started by jumping out to the end. Now we got to fill in all the gaps. Okay, what's the protocol for that? What does total emissions mean? The trucking, moving the rig to the location or not? And so at least it started there. So I'll stop there.
No, and that's terrific insight, and that zero emissions well, that'll be very interesting. And just as I flip this over to Donna, Bob, from your terrific presentation, I would build off a couple of things you said. I mean, there is a whole auditor bandwagon being developed in terms of organizations that are saying, we'll come in and look at your processes. But one that Donna will reflect on, I'm sure, is a really neat organization called Equitable Origins. They have their EO 100 certification process, of which Donna's company is one of 3 operators in Canada. The others being Vermilion, and then 7 Generations was the first, now within the ARC family. But I do know that Equitable Origin is serious about Canada. They've placed their program coordinator in here. Heather Jones is a Calgary resident and is part of the build out. I know from conversations with them that they have big plans for Canada, and Donna will help us guide this because she's very close to the process. But what's fascinating about Equitable Origins in the context of this overall thing is you can be a great gas producer, But unless your gas production integrates with your Indigenous strategies, your community strategies, and the 5 principles of the EO, then you're further down the report card, if you will. And this comes to this whole transparency dynamic. And some of the others, like you're mentioning, Bob, are organizations like Project Canary and other certifiers of process. And so on that, Donna has been inside that, and and it's a big part of what she does at Pacific Cambrium. And I would invite her to take us on that journey inside that certification process if she can. So.
Fantastic. Thanks for all of the comments of the presenters before me. And yeah, I will speak a little bit about the equitable origin process. Just wanted to highlight something I heard Brad say earlier that I think is really important in terms of having other people tell our story for us and how much that increases the credibility. I've been a believer of that for a long time, and I think that we can manifest that through the likes of an equitable origin. And I just want to talk about them a little bit in terms of the differentiation of all these different alphabet soup of standards. I know I heard that in our breakout group that it's confusing for people. There's so many different organizations. What I would suggest is that if you're looking for third-party audit type or certification, there are not that many organizations. And what I also will suggest is that Equitable Origin, who is a nonprofit organization, is viewed as the umbrella certification because they do focus on the 5 principles, of which they're ethics, social, Indigenous engagement, labor, and environment. So they cover the whole system of ESG from start to finish. So not just focusing on methane, which has been a huge focus in the States particularly. There's organizations that are certifiers. I'm going to say there's MIQ, there's Project Canary that also has, they have a larger program than just methane, but they don't have the same focus on the Indigenous engagement piece, which Equitable Origin is that was the origin of their organization out of Ecuador over 10 years ago. The focus was to ensure that Indigenous peoples were being fairly treated. And so it fits well with what we're trying to do in Canada in obviously current context, but for many years. So I think EO has, in my mind, doesn't really have a competitor at this point. They also have a methane section, but they're not the metrics based the same way that other certifiers are. And so, they like to partner with MIQ or other methane certifiers as well, just to beef up that part of the certification. So I also wanted to give kudos to Jennifer from the supply chain perspective, because I know she's working on the addendum piece with Equitable Origin, and she's asking the question of how are you as a producer addressing ESG and bringing it into your decision making in your supply chain. And I think one way that we want to do it is ensuring that companies in our supply chain have the same core values as we do. It's about core values and all the principles that are flushed out through the Equitable Origin process. It's a very rigorous process to go through. There's 3 phases. One is you do a self-assessment and you look internally. So basically, we chose to do this. We are not a publicly traded entity. We chose to shine a mirror on ourselves and look within and say, what are we actually doing well? Because we thought we were doing some really great things. However, you don't really know till you actually start comparing to others. And so we did our self-assessment. Then we moved into the next phase. We identified some gaps. We were not perfect. So please, companies that are considering doing this, don't be afraid. They will work with you. They're not there to cut you down. What their intention is to elevate everybody's game in the sector here and improve performance. There's a huge focus on continuous improvement, which Brad mentioned earlier. That's the goal here. It's how do we keep moving forward with these, the ESG goals. And so the second phase is an independent assessment. So they have experts that go out into the field and they review your facilities. They go out and meet with Indigenous communities, the leaders, and find out, does this producer actually behave the way that they say they're behaving? And that is a really critical piece for them to go out and talk to Indigenous rights holders and say, yes, they are actually engaging and following the principles of UNDRIP and talking to us up front and doing the planning. And So that is just such a critical piece to have that credibility and trust. And I think, you know, the piece that Brad talked about, trust, can be earned by getting this third-party certification, because it is a rigorous process. It's not something that you just buy and, you know, pay money and get. It's very thorough, and you have to demonstrate that you have systems in place to accomplish all of the performance targets. The last phase is just the certification piece. EO has a independent body that they go to as a peer review in the UK to make sure that they are actually not just giving out certifications, that they're legitimate. So it's very rigorous. So I would encourage people to take a look at that process if you haven't. It's a trademark certification. And then, you know, there's just so many areas I could talk about, but we could move further into supply chain conversation around procurement. One of the things that we're doing is when we're having our meetings with Indigenous communities, we actually have our procurement rep with us at the meeting. And she's become extremely engaged in the criteria, including not just Indigenous engagement piece, but diversity, equity, inclusion. So looking at all of our suppliers and trying to figure out, for pre-qualification purposes, starting to dig deeper into their principles and seeing what's their core value, what do they have in terms of initiatives around DE&I, diversity, equity, inclusion. So that's one way I think companies can really embrace some decision making on the procurement side. So I'll leave it with that unless there's some questions off the bat.
No, that is wonderful, Donna, and I know just in my own dealings with equitable origins and people like Mike Kiefer at Kiefer Ecological, like it truly, who's one of the independent assessors among many, and it's a phenomenal organization. And you know, stressing the point that Donna says, they want to work with you. It's not, you know, it's not a pass-fail situation. It is a process of improvement over time and setting different bars and different processes. And then, you know, ideally, quite practically speaking, for some of the gas producers, until all of the Montney folks, for example, are certified, there's potentially a premium to be had with, in the market, right? Because there's been a fundamental shift in the buyer and brokering market about if your gas comes from this source and it's certified, yeah, we'll pay a few pennies more, you know, for it. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Brad, who will moderate the questions. He has a bunch of questions for the panelists themselves, but really the important reason why you're here today is for you to ask the questions of Bob and Donna and Jen, and we can do that through the chat, and Brad will moderate that process along with his own questions.
Super. Thanks, Bill. So one question someone posted was, what's the cost to get certified or verified by Equitable Origin?
So I can answer that, and it's not for me to advertise their pricing model, but what I will say is there are different levels depending on your production volume, but I'm going to tell you that the fees from Equitable Origin are very small. They're a nonprofit organization, and their intention is to drive and improve performance. So they're not trying to garner big fees and get rich off of this. What the piece that costs more is the independent assessors in the middle, the actual experts that have to go out and do all the work in the field. And so, you know, depending on the size of your site, for example, like we are a fairly contiguous land base and, you know, not one of the largest producers, I guess. So you can choose different sites. For example, Vermilion chose to certify, I think, 3 of their sites. And so because they're an international entity, it wasn't done as a corporate basis. Ours was corporately done. We did everything because we are a pretty contiguous land base. So the independent assessor, you know, in our area for our size company, you know, ballparkish, I'm going to say the whole thing costs around 100 grand for us. So not significant dollars when you're talking about the differentiation of the natural gas molecule, which we're seeing today in terms of some of the rewards for those producers that are willing to improve performance and step up. So, you know, I get it. People will argue down the road that, you know, that premium could go away if we all certify. Well, that would be a good thing, because what that would do is provide a positive narrative for our sector for long-term, for sustainability and longevity, to have others globally recognize us in Canada for our performance. So I think it's a win-win either way, whether you get rewarded early for being an early mover in the next few years, or whether we just are rewarded as a whole sector.
So got another question, somebody asking about what insights can be shared regarding specifics. So I think I'd like to hear from each one of you in this one. What are specific type of initiatives, processes, systems, assessments for electric or renewable energy that you've implemented? So can each one of you give us a practical example of something where you've taken and done kind of this energy transition piece, and how have you valued it? What's been valuable, and what's worked, what hasn't?
Brad, maybe I'll reflect on a project we got involved in Wyoming. It was a natural gas project. This goes back almost 10 years ago. We built 10 purpose-built electric rigs that ran off of produced gas from the location. So it was all pre-sales gas. And the area they were working on, the Bureau had said they can drill as many wells as they want as long as they kept their emissions under this level. And so they established that we built 10 purpose-built rigs that ran, as I mentioned, ran off produced gas with a 3-inch line to the rig. And we helped evolve what's called the battery energy storage system to kind of mute the sponginess you get when using natural gas as a driver on a periodic demand application like a drilling rig when you're coming off bottom in that. But what the operator was able to do was he was able to run 2 more of our rigs than anyone else's rigs, conventional rigs, and bring on arguably 20% more gas from the region, and stay within the requirements, the emission requirements set by the BM. So that was a practical initiative. I haven't seen anything like that anywhere else in the world be applied, and that was 10 years ago. So and I'm not suggesting regulators should jump all over this, but I think there's some opportunities there where there are solutions that are right at our fingertips, but they need to come out through, as everyone has talked about, the measurement. And I had not heard of this equitable origins before this meeting, and that sounds like a very interesting and legitimate proposition.
Thanks, Bob. That's a great real-world example, and probably one that needs to be heard and promulgated, particularly to regulators, that type of thing. I think equitable origins is similar to ISO certification, other things. I think it's important for people to realize they don't come in and build your system for you. You need to build your system. They come in and verify it and improve it. So they're not the consultants to tell you how to build ESG. You need to build it and figure it out. So just, Donna, I'll go with you next. Do you have specific examples or any comments?
I'm going to pass that to Jennifer at the moment, because I was reflecting on another question that came up in the chat. So maybe
Okay.
I'll take that instead.
Sure. Jennifer?
Yeah, thanks, Donna. Sure. Yeah, I can give a specific example. On the renewable side, it's an interesting question. I think it's very recent for us, but CDN, we earlier this month actually announced a merger acquisition with a company called InPhase Electric and Controls, and their base is in southern Alberta, and they have a really exciting history doing the large scale commercial solar farms. So clients around Brooks and Strathmore and whatnot. So that adds to our kind of renewable service capacity as a company. But as a tangible example, what we've been able to do with that skill set, even just within recent weeks and months here, is one of our oil and gas clients. They have a large well pad, the well pad that was constructed it was an 18 well pad, so a pretty big footprint there. They've drilled 6 wells on that pad, and for various reasons are likely going to be unable to drill the remaining 12 wells. So they have this pad with a huge footprint, only part of it which is being used, and so they have this great idea of putting a micro solar farm on that flat footprint, that empty footprint. So the idea is they're working closely on designing and building up that kind of micro solar farm, and the idea being that would offset obviously the utility demand for that pad and like the others in the area as well. So I think that's a very specific example, but I think keeping with the theme of all this great work that the energy sector is doing that nobody knows about or no one shares, that's exciting, right? And I think that's a great example to show we're still producing that gas that we need, but we're also incorporating the renewable aspect as well. I think the second example I want to share too, it's maybe not specific to renewables, but just on the partnership comment is we have a few customers that we've worked very closely with on kind of building that partnership, so not being a commodity but being partners. And one thing that's worked really well is when we have that strategic partnership, we're getting away from sort of the bidding and the being really cutting down to the penny and the dollar and whatnot. And what we can do is actually achieve better value across the board, right? So with a couple of our partners, what we've done is we said, for every dollar that you spend in CDN, every cent is going to go, the work will be done with one or more of our Indigenous partners, because we have formal partnerships. So money will be directed towards those communities for every cent that's spent with us. And we will report back to you, what that value is, and we will work with you on kind of opportunities with the community for job shadowing, hiring, employment, and whatnot. So that's been a really, really exciting, I think, example of collaboration, because obviously, the producers winning because they're able to show that they're investing in the community. CDN is winning because we have a great customer and a great kind of project stream revenue, and then the community is winning because they're also having that constant stream of revenue and more engagement from the company. So that's one thing that I'm excited about, and I think that's really a lot of opportunity there in the future for doing more of that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Great examples. So there's a question: how much value emphasis do E&Ps place on service companies' ESG performance when deciding who to hire? And are E&Ps willing to pay a premium for strong ESG performance? And I'll say on the supplier side, with some of the discussions I've had, there's a lot of frustration around this about, if we go do all this stuff, will it pay off? Or then are you just going to grind us down to a commodity bid basis again? So I'd like to hear from all of you on that. Donna?
Sure. Yeah, I can weigh in. I think, it does go back to some of your opening remarks about how we view suppliers relative to E&Ps, and we have to reframe how we think about that relationship as more of a partnership, which Jennifer mentioned. It is critical to work jointly on this. It is early days, and I know there's some E&Ps out there that are considering building in these criteria into their supply chain evaluation, and at some point they're not going to use suppliers that don't have the same core values. So it's early. That hasn't really come full into effect. I know some of the larger companies have a little bit more clout when it comes to making change in industry, but I think like smaller companies like ourselves can do it by working directly with the companies like CDN and the companies that are willing to open their minds towards doing the right thing, and then that differentiated performance will result in reward. So it's a bit of a leap of faith sometimes, and I think it's just a different lens to think about this. It's like, if you're always going to evaluate everything you do based on ROI, which I know people return on equity or whatever metric you want to say, it kind of goes to your earlier comments, Brad, around you're going to see those results, but you need to actually show the leadership and do them before you can verify that. like, how do you quantify upfront, is this going to move the needle? Is this going to pay off for us? Sometimes you need to make decisions within your organizations that are framed from an ESG lens so that you actually move yourself forward in a positive way, and then you get rewarded. We're seeing that happen. We didn't expect to get rewarded for this when we started doing the analysis a couple of years ago for the certification, but now that we've done this, it's quite surprising, really, how many inbounds we're getting on this. People want this. End users want this. LDCs, it's something that's wanted. And I think what will happen is the more that people realize there's value there, that will translate into us also engaging with the suppliers in a different way, and potentially more of a partnership approach. So for example, when a company comes in and says, I want you to have EO certified gas or certified responsibly sourced gas. So that's kind of a term that's been used in the States a lot, RSG, and we're starting to see CRSG, so certified responsibly sourced gas. That's what equitable origin is moving towards. You're going to see an end user coming to the table, whether that's on a platform where you have deals negotiated directly, or whether it's a bilateral deal. You're going to have an end user coming to us and saying, I want certified responsibly sourced gas that's EO or MIQ or whatever one they prefer. And then if we can demonstrate that our supply chain is actually certified the same way, then they would share in that benefit potentially. So for example, perhaps CDN could come to the table with us and negotiate, like we could take all the groups that are certified and offer a share of that premium. I'm not saying that hasn't been discussed at this point. These are just, landmark things we're working on. It's breaking ground here. So is that a way that could work? Potentially.
Donna, if I could interrupt, and maybe if you could add, because, with the EO process, Pacific Cambrian did something bigger than that in terms of the alignment with the expansive platform, in terms of the digital fingerprinting of your production. And I think the audience might be really interested in that, because that is a trend that's taking off in terms of in effect, the tokenization through blockchain of production. So maybe 30 seconds on that dimension of it as well. I know it's more than 30 seconds, but I think it's a value chain process for you guys.
Yeah, no pressure. Do that in 30 seconds. Really high level, though, there's a desire on the part of end users to see the provenance of the molecule of gas and to be able to go to their customer base and say that we are supporting producers that are actually responsibly sourcing the gas. And so the process we engaged in, it involves 3 different entities. We have data that we send over to Validaire, which is the company that does the validation of all of our schematics, our production, our gas analysis, everything. It's a transparent process that we provide everything to Validaire. They make sure it's in the right data set to hand off to Clearstone Engineering. Dave Picard is a leader in the GHG protocols. He's the 30-year engineer that's worked with GHG inventory for federal and provincial governments. He looks at that data and has allocated a Clear Tracker trademark process to identify our methane intensity. And then from that, the data payload is uploaded into expansive system. And that is what Bill was referring to, the blockchain or the smart contract-based system, so that we have an immutable digital natural gas asset. So it avoids the trouble that happened previously with the renewable, the REC certificates previously, where there was double counting and people got really negative and didn't trust the system. So this system actually sets us up for success, so that once our digital natural gas asset is created, we can go in there and look at different attributes, whether it's EO, whether it's MIQ, whether it's whatever attribute it is for certification, trade that, and then it's retired. There's an automatic retirement of that digital signature for each molecule so that you cannot double count them. That's really the key.
That very well put, because I think it's not only the certification of the production processes and all that's involved, but it's that whole value chain of provenance, as you've so nicely described. And to the point of this conversation today, the more your suppliers are cognizant of that process and asking themselves consciously, how do we contribute to the efficacy of those processes that Pacific Cambrium has undertaken, more likely they are to rise to the surface of the preferred vendor list notionally, right? Okay, back to you, Brad. Sorry for that, but I thought that
was
part
excellent,
of it.
Bill.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up. Bob, I wanted to go to you because, you know, are E&Ps willing to pay a premium for strong ESG performance? What are you seeing so far, and what do you think the trend is going to be? How is this going to change?
I mean, outside of that specific example I mentioned prior, no, it's just not woven in at all. I find though that when we present natural gas options and our battery energy storage systems, we have to provide a reasonable argument that we can save an equivalent amount in diesel cost. So there is an economic equation there to neutralize it. But we find that with operators having a lot more pad drilling now, the conversation starts to expand a little bit on what's a better long-term energy source here. And they're getting sometimes their production lines ahead of the pad, whereas before their approvals for the line couldn't happen until they had shown production on the pad. Maybe a regulatory thing where they can get approval to get gas to the pad before then. But we're finding we still have to provide an economic benefit to save emissions. I'm really liking what I'm hearing about this equitable origins and the provenance of the molecule of gas and all those things, because those have an economic benefit, and those will weave themselves down the chain as far as the suppliers who can provide more emission-friendly equipment to get the work done. So I'm kind of excited about what I'm hearing through this discussion as well on that front.
Thank you, Bob. Jennifer, I've got one more question that somebody posted, but did you want to speak on this one in terms of the premium for ESG performance? Would you like to comment on that, or would you like to comment on the next one?
Absolutely, yeah. Just let me add something to that, Brad. I absolutely agree with Bob there. I'd say that the resounding answer is no. Companies currently aren't willing to pay more. I think it gets back to that question posed initially of, how are your ESG priorities being reflected in procurement decisions? And I think most companies, procurement and supply chain management kind of sit on an island by themselves, and they sort of run on their own, and sort of these larger corporate views are not necessarily incorporated. That being said, the internal optimist in me wants to comment on, I think the positive examples we've seen are companies that have ESG or sustainability people integrated into their supply chain management team. And that does exist. I think Donna mentioned, their procurement person attending Indigenous community meetings. Suncor is a fantastic example where they have ESG people in that team, and that works really well. I think the other piece to maybe put a positive spin on it too is that, we have seen some examples, and I'd say again, this is the exception, certainly not the rule, but we have seen some examples even just this past year where, RFPs are coming in our door because of our ESG strategy that we wouldn't have seen them otherwise. That doesn't mean that we can, price them higher or that they're going to pay more, but we're sort of seeing those opportunities. And, it's slow. I think the focus for ESG over the past, 12, 24 months has been exponential, right, in terms of the conversation and focus on it. And I think there's been a lagging effect on when it comes to cost, right? And, I think that's the goal. I think I am optimistic. I think that's the goal, that, there is going to be an ability to charge a premium for companies that have this ESG strategy, but that's currently not the general theme, today.
And I think my comment on governance earlier is part of the pushback for us suppliers. If your words talk about how much you value ESG, but in your actions, you're not willing to pay anything for it, then what does that say for your integrity?
Absolutely. Well, I think, everyone's been great at talking and lots of talk, but, let's walk. And really, we need to sprint now, but, let's start with the walk and show us in the walk, right?
All right. Well, thank you for that. And the final word goes to you, Jen. And thank you. I want to say thanks to our panel, Bob and Jennifer and Donna, phenomenal. I hope you as panelists learned from each other today, and it sounds like you did. And I hope our broader audience, we co-learned from each other. I mean, this is a fast-moving and fluid and dynamic space, but you can tell by the way that if you were to sort of look at all the world's big newspapers and financial reporting platforms and media platforms like the Financial Times, and you were to start quantifying how many times ESG appears in headlines, you can get a real sense rapidly of how, whether or not you agree with all the dimensions of it, it will evolve and morph. It's very satisfying to know that Canada will be home to the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is a movement in the ESG space among the rating agencies and the reporting frameworks to start bringing clarity to that. And so the IFRS Foundation was a big driver behind the creation of this ISSB, which will be headquartered in Montreal. So that's kudos to Canada in terms of recognition of how we've performed in this space, even before we attach these shorthand letters to the movement. And so, so again, thank you very much to our audience. And I'm going to just ask our colleague Al Kassam at CSUR to bring it home with some reflections on future opportunities to engage with us. So,
great. Thank you, everyone. Brad, Bill, great job steering the workshop today. I truly enjoyed it. Lots of comments, and I just want to confirm with Brad and Stephanie that we'll be sending out a recording of this to all the participants. So you can go back and revisit the comments because there were a great number of great comments. And I also want to just to reiterate what Bill said, I want to thank the panel, Donna, Jennifer, and Bob. Thank you for your time and your comments. And thank you to all of you that joined in today and added your comments and insights and experiences and contributions to our discussions today. So I really appreciate it on behalf of everyone at CSUR. Just want to remind everyone, in case you're interested, we are scheduled to have one more event for the year for CSUR. Our next webinar is on December 7th. Cameron Bean from Scotia Capital will discuss booms, busts, cycles, shocks, 2021 and futures of Canadian oil and gas. And perhaps some of the discussions that took place today will be part of Cameron's presentation. Please visit our website for more information and to register. Thanks again to all of you. And unless there's any other comments, wish everyone a wonderful rest of the day. Look forward to having ESG seminar or workshop number 2 in the new year, and have you all back as participants. So with that, I will end the show and say goodbye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.